Now, I'm delighted to be joined by, we're describing them as two political wonks. I don't know whether that's disparaging or not. John McTernan, former political secretary to Tony Blair, joins me, along with Christopher Hope, GBNews' political editor, who's had some kind of never-ending journey from Scotland down to Liverpool to be here today. Hello, chaps. Lovely to see you. Should we look backwards and then look forwards?
Yeah. Yes.
Let's look back at the Tory party conference. John, you got a free hit on this one. What did you reckon? What do you think of Rishi's speech? He's the change candidate, don't you know?
So, a disaster in so many different ways.
How now? Isn't that harsh?
Well, no, the first thing is, Labour's proposition as the opposition is it's time for a change.
Yes.
And Rishi then used our slogan.
Yeah.
And I
Maybe
said,
it means you haven't got original enough ideas.
I tweeted, he's done a clip for Labour's digital, and sure enough, they clipped him and used him on a Labour ad. Rishi's saying it's time for a change, the voters want change. That's Labour's message. Secondly, how can you be the candidate of the future when you cancel the future? You go, I'm for the future, here's my plans for the future. Oh, by the way, I've cancelled HS2. So what are your promises?
Although Keir Starmer wanted to cancel HS2 back in 2015.
Keir Starmer, all local constituency MPs have the right to oppose developments they don't want, and they want to be done the right way. But look, I think...
Shouldn't he make his mind up and stick to it?
Well, look, I think look at the instability in the Tories. You get Suella Braverman's terrible rhetoric about immigration, but then you also get Prime Minister going, multiculturalism must have worked because I'm an Asian, I'm an Indian heritage.
Well, don't lots of people in the Red Wall agree with her rhetoric on immigration?
Don't
they think that you're going to create more porous borders?
In the Red Wall, what they think is the Prime Minister said he stopped the boats, and now he's saying, he's boasting, I've reduced the boats.
I know, but is Keir Starmer popular in the Red Wall? He's a Romaniac.
He is really popular in the Red Wall.
John, come on.
We're 20 points ahead in the poll. We're popular everhere.
Oh.
That's why we won in Scotland.
Let's bring Chopper in. What did you make of Rishi Sunak? He's got an event on. Is it tomorrow? Why is it?
Well, there were rumours, Camilla. No more than that. There might be other things happening this week with the Tories. It's all the wrong way around. Normally, this conference happens before the Tory party's won, and then they get the final sign-off on all political news of the season, and it annoys them. They've somehow messed it up, so they're second to last, not last. Which means the big full stop will come from Keir Starmer's speech on Tuesday, and Rayner on Wednesday. I thought the party conference was a 7 out of 10 for me.
Yeah.
Nothing dramatic. My test for these parties is how does it make people feel richer, feel better off themselves? And all he says is we're going to bring down inflation, which is a bit of a kind of economic thing. I don't know if
the best tax cut you can have is for me to halve inflation.
Where's the brave move?
Yeah.
Make a brave move on tax. I don't mean inheritance tax, which affects a tiny portion of people, and not many people really. Where's the big bold news for people?
I was just looking for some data. I'm going to try and remember it. It was from the Mail on Sunday today. Delta Poll have done a survey, and it asked those asked about both Rishi and indeed Keir being change candidates. And the bottom line is that this polling showed that people don't think either of them are the change candidate. No. I mean, who created the biggest stir at conference? It was Nigel Farage.
Yeah, wandering around. But saying nothing, by the way, free hit for him.
GBNews his own Nigel Farage.
Our colleague, Camilla.
Indeed so, our esteemed colleague.
Not saying anything, it's just existing.
I know, but the point I'll put to John, you are very close to Tony Blair. There are people lining the streets going Blair, Blair, Blair in 97. That simply isn't happening with Starmer. He's not as charismatic. He hasn't got the wow factor. There was some comment about how he'd need to have some razzmatazz, or he was saying, I'm not going to have any razzmatazz, and everyone said, well, that doesn't surprise anyone, mate.
Oh, look, Keir is doing something right to be 20 points ahead in the polls. He's doing something right to
he's not the Tories.
To win Rutherglen so well. No, it's not simply not being the Tories, it would be a shrug. 20 points in the lead is Blair-style leads. In a world where, and I think this is important to understand, all people's hope in change has been beaten out of them. They've had a terrible decade with this government who basically decided, in the end, if we can't make things better, we'll try to persuade everybody that nothing can ever get better.
Yeah.
And that's a really difficult situation to be the opposition, because in government you've got so much power to do things and persuade things. I think Keir offers the safety and the stability. Now, there's nothing flashy about stability, but it reduces costs, it makes things...
Chris wants to come in on that.
Is that not a risk, though, John? I mean, you were around with Tony Blair back in 97, 2001. His big issue, he always talked about, was why he wasn't bolder when he came in. Starmer, to me, is almost tiptoeing into office, not doing a lot. I mean, to say things like he would reverse Rwanda this morning elsewhere, he wants to build 1.5 million homes, that's not much more than the current government. Is not the risk you're so nervous about this idea of the Ming vase he's carrying around number 10. If he drops it, it's all over, so he daren't do anything.
So the government aren't even meeting their own housing targets. They abolished housing targets. They've given up on housing. There was no mention of housing last week during conference, yet it's one of the top issues that people talk about. So the fact that Labour are committing, that Angie Rayner are now here committing to massive housing targets, that's really, really important for us and for the country to hear that we're doing that. And the thing is, we're in a world where promises have been made by governments, by the 5 prime ministers that we've had, and then they've been broken by the next prime minister or broken by the actual prime minister. Keir is being really clear. He will make a promise and then they'll deliver it. So
but
back to the builders, not the blockers.
John, let me just come in on that, because there has been some criticism. Where's the opposition? He didn't really react to the net zero climb down. We don't really know where he is with regard to some of his economic policies versus what Jeremy Hunt is going to announce in the autumn statement. There's been a climb down on some of the private school stuff, which seems to be the only identifiable policy.
There wasn't a climb down.
Well, there's a climb down on charitable status. They've watered it down, John.
The VAT is being levied. The VAT is being levied. That's what gets you the money.
Yeah.
Changing charitable status is 10 years in the courts.
But then we've got one policy. Let's allow more people to change sex. Do you think there are loads of people in the Red Wall in this area saying, do you know what I want from a next Labour Prime Minister? I want more people to change sex.
I'll tell you what people in the Red Wall, people in Merseyside, people in London, people in Scotland, what they believe. They don't believe that unhappy people should be made more unhappy by a government. And there's something about the way the government approaches the trans issue, like it approaches every issue. It wants to divide us and turn us against each other. And what our country needs is a decade of working together, all of us, to deal with the absolutely gigantic problems we face, whether it's climate transition, or whether it's getting productivity going, or whether it is improving our schools, improving our health and well-being.
Some might argue that trans activists have been quite divisive on that issue, but let's move on to Scotland, because, John, I know you were also former Chief of Staff to Jim Murphy when he was Scottish Labour leader. Are the SNP finished?
No, the SNP aren't finished, because there's going to be support for independence in Scotland for a very long time, in my view. It'd be the wrong thing for Scotland to do, and I don't believe a second referendum will happen. If it did, the SNP would lose again. Scotland would stay in the UK. But the SNP have taken a beating. Yes. And the interesting thing about that, they won't concede that they've taken a beating. Labour's majority was larger than the SNP vote. That's like back to that's pre-referendum politics. Labour as dominant. You have to accept when the voters send you a message, you've got to go, we got it. It's one of the reasons that Keir Starmer's taken Labour on a journey. He said, look, the voters were right to reject Jeremy Corbyn. The voters in Scotland were right to reject the SNP. If the SNP don't listen, they'll lose again and again and again. Yeah. So Labour can come back in Scotland and win seats. Labour can come back in the Scottish Parliament and maybe form an administration, but the SNP will still be there.
Chopper, is Scotland going to be the difference for Starmer between a minority and majority government?
It means he must win less votes in the Red Wall to win. I mean, 20 seats, 30 seats. Well, what's your forecast, John?
I think 20 seats in Scotland would be a brilliant result, because the swing we got at 20% is twice the swing that there's been in the opinion polls in Scotland. If we got the 10%, the 11% swing that's in the opinion polls, we'd pick up about 20 in Scotland, and that changes the nature of politics.
Do you need people who support the union to vote for a Tory or Labour candidate and not between red and blue?
So what I think is happening in Scotland and in the rest of the country is they're looking at two governments, a Tory government and an SNP government, and they're going, what's the best way to get these people out? So in England it's Lib Dem or Labour, and in Scotland it is mainly Labour. There'll be some seats where Labour voters in the northeast vote for the Tories, and in the borders. So unionist voters are going to vote for the best candidate to beat the SNP, to send them a message, because you've got a government, a Tory government, in power in UK for 13 years. SNP in power for 16 years. Yeah. In the end, political gravity asserts itself.
Chris, I asked the Transport Secretary Mark Harper earlier whether the Tories had given up on Scotland. I mean, that's what it looks like. That chap who went for the by-election in Rutherglen got 1,000 odd votes.
I mean, deposit.
Are Scottish Tories going to be an oxymoron come 2024?
Not an oxymoron. That's a big word for the Sunday morning.
I know, Jesus.
Yes.
It's the right word, though.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, sometimes they say young Tories an oxymoron, but we wouldn't necessarily agree with that, but
And
Scottish Tory.
Rutherglen was a Tory seat till 64.
Yes.
When I worked out there with John for different newspapers, the turn of the century, John.
Exactly.
The big issue then was the poll tax. That was raised. That was the reason why the Tories hemorrhaged support.
Yeah.
And that's not really raised, is it? It's more. I mean, the Boris Johnson went down like a cup of cold sick up there.
Yeah.
I think Sunak is more popular, and maybe the follow of Sunak, whoever that is that they lose, could be better.
The great John Curtis said about this. The Tories are on 15% in Scotland, but that's because they're unpopular across the whole of the country. If you're on 25 in the UK, you're going to have to be on 15 in Scotland. And so that Sunak may be more palatable than Johnson. The thing is, in the middle between Johnson and Sunak was Truss, and Truss has destroyed the trust with voters everywhere.
Yeah.
And until you can get over that moment, and I think Truss is the new poll tax.
So it's all about competency.
It's competent.
And that's why Starmer's untested on competency.
But the Tories are clearly, it's funny, the government are the risk and the opposition are the safety. And that's where politics...
Although, let's just talk about somebody who is considered a bit risky in the Labour Party, Angela Rayner.
The goddess.
Is she? John, why'd you say that?
Because
which goddess?
She's got an appeal...
Right.
That reaches across politics.
Yeah.
She passed it. I wrote a piece for another of our former papers.
Feeling the crush going on here.
Explaining Angie Rayner's appeal. Angie Rayner is definitely a politician you want to go down the pub with.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you want to...
Unlike Keir Starmer, you might say.
No, but Keir, I've seen Keir in the pub. I had a taxi driver from GBNews once, and he said, I met that Keir Starmer. I met him in a pub. He knows his football. He's good company.
True.
So, but Angie is just like, you look at her and you know, she's fun. And there's so few politicians.
I know, but she's got to be careful because they're doing this whole safety first thing. We don't want her going off at fringes and calling Tories scumbags again, do we?
Might for news channels.
Well, we do want that for news,
no, you need some colour and character. You need a Mo Molam. You need a Peter Mann. Somebody who's larger than life. Angie's larger than life.
She's your Prescott, the new Prescott.
Yeah, no, she is. And
obviously, literally deputy leader like Prescott was.
Everybody needs a Prescott.
And she's going to be speaking later, I think, isn't she? 11:20 today.
So,
I think that's what I'm hearing in my ear, and my ear is never wrong. So Angie good, and final word, Rachel Reeves. I mean, to be fair, she's been a bit of a silent assassin, bringing up the rear,
the city
adding
loves her.
some competence to the operation.
The city loves her.
Right, the city loves her. This is curious.
But there was a line last week, though. There's a line last week from Rishi Sunak to the Bloomberg lunch. He said, beware Labour. They will tolerate you, but we love you. And that's what the Tories, said. So Labour tolerate business. It's not a love thing.
I did a dinner in the city a week ago, and it was a room which had £1 trillion under investment, and they were all clear. Labour is the next government, and they trust Rachel for her stable management of the future economy. And that's the thing, that Labour, they don't see a risk.
Final word.
This place is rammed. I mean, gone are the cardigans of the Corbyn era. Everyone's wearing sharp suits like GBNews staff.
We've got more tickets sold to conference than any time in Labour history. It's the biggest attendance.
Well, you heard it here first. John McTernan, Christopher Hope, gone are the cardigans of the Corbyn era. I think we'll end on that note.